I'm going to talk about something that will make people a little uncomfortable. This is a topic that's been dominating my feeds. The opioid crisis broke chronic pain care in this country, and nobody cares what it did to you. We didn't cause the crisis. We didn't overprescribe. We didn't lie about addiction rates. We didn't profit from pushing pills. But you're the ones paying the price. You're being treated like criminals for having a medical condition. You're being denied care for the sake of optics. You're dying by suicide at alarming rates, and nobody's counting those deaths. It's because the narrative is simple. Opioids are bad, and anyone who needs them must be bad too. Today, I'm breaking that silence. I'm saying what chronic pain patients whisper but rarely say out loud. We are collateral damage, and it's about time someone gave a damn. Welcome back to Painfully Real. Today we're going somewhere the media won't touch. We're talking about how the opioid crisis didn't just expose a national problem, it created another one, a bigger one. For people who had nothing to do with addiction, nothing to do with misuse, nothing to do with the decisions that caused the epidemic to begin with. Chronic pain patients have been treated like collateral damage. They're punished, restricted, stigmatized, left to fend for themselves while lawmakers, hospitals, and pharmacies overcorrected. And the people who actually live with daily pain, they're the ones paying the price. This episode is not about glorifying medication. It's not about debating policy. It's about calling out the truth that chronic pain patients are suffering because the system swung too far in the opposite direction. We got caught in the crossfire of a crisis we didn't cause. So let's go right into it. Before the opioid crisis became a headline, chronic pain patients already had a difficult enough time getting taken seriously. You already battled disbelief. You already fought dismissal. You already faced judgment from doctors who thought you were just exaggerating or drug seeking or just plain weak. Getting a chronic pain diagnosis was hard. Getting treatment was harder. Getting people to believe you, it's nearly impossible. But once the opioid crisis hit the news, once it became a national scandal, well, everything changed. And it didn't change for the better. Overnight, every pain patient became guilty until proven innocent. Every prescription was viewed as a threat. Every request for relief became a red flag. Doctors who used to help us suddenly became suspicious. They started questioning our motives, doubting our pain levels, treating us like we were trying to manipulate them. You've got people with lifelong pain conditions were suddenly treated like criminals. Pharmacies started questioning you, interrogating you at the counter like you'd done something wrong. Why do you need this? Have you tried other options? Are you seeing multiple doctors? I've heard stories of chronic pain sufferers standing at a pharmacy counter and had a pharmacist, not a doctor, a pharmacist, tell them they weren't comfortable filling their prescription, a legitimate prescription from a legitimate doctor for a legitimate condition. They were looked at like a criminal, like they were doing something wrong by trying to manage a medical condition. They had to beg, had to explain, to justify their existence and pain to someone who had no business making that judgment. And that's what it became. Chronic pain patients having to justify their suffering to people who weren't qualified to make medical decisions, but had the power to deny you anyways. Your doctors became afraid. The doctors who used to help us become terrified. I understand why the DEA was targeting them. The medical boards were scrutinizing them. Lawsuits were piling up. They were caught between helping their patients and protecting their licenses, and most of them chose self-preservation. Can you blame them? Doctors started dropping pain patients. Entire practices closed their doors to anyone with chronic pain. We don't treat that here anymore. It's too risky. The ones who did continue seeing pain patients became so restrictive, so paranoid, that the relationship turned adversarial. Constant drug tests, pain contracts with clauses that felt like parole agreements. pill counts, random callbacks, threats of dismissal for any perceived violation. One patient I know was dismissed from her doctor's practice because she took an extra pill during a severe flare. One pill. She'd been a patient for 10 years. No history of misuse. No red flags. Just one extra pill during unbearable pain. And she was cut off completely. No taper. No transition plan. Just, you violated the contract. We can't see you anymore. Insurance companies saw an opportunity and seized it. They implemented strict limits on prescriptions, prior authorization requirements that took weeks or months, step therapy requirements that forced patients to fail multiple treatments before they'd cover what actually worked. And they did it, all of this, under the guise of patient safety. But let's be real, it was about money. It's always about money. Denying expensive pain treatments and forcing patients into cheaper alternatives regardless of effectiveness, it saved insurance companies billions. And guess what? They got to look like heroes while doing it. We're protecting people from opioids. No, you're protecting your profit margins. Major pharmacy chains implemented corporate policies that essentially prohibited filing certain prescriptions. They set arbitrary limits on doses, quantities, and frequencies that had nothing to do with medical necessity and everything to do with liability. Pharmacists who are not doctors, who don't know your medical history, who haven't examined you, started making medical decisions. They started to refuse to fill prescriptions they deemed too high or unnecessary. They question your doctor's judgment. They treat you like you were doing something illegal. You know, I've known patients who've been to 15, 20 different pharmacies trying to get a legitimate prescription filled, being rejected over and over, being humiliated, being made to feel like they're a criminal. But here's what made it truly impossible. The narrative, once the story became opioids are killing people, there was no room for nuance. No room for yes, and yes, addiction is a crisis, and chronic pain patients need appropriate care. Yes, overprescribing was a problem, and underprescribing is now a problem. Yes, we need to be careful and we need to be compassionate, but those conversations didn't happen. It became binary, black and white, good and evil, and chronic pain patients were on the wrong side of that line. Now, let me tell you what actually happened when the system overcorrected. Let me tell you the stories that media won't cover. People who were stable were destroyed. I know someone, let's call her Linda, who had been managing her CRPS successfully for 12 years, worked full-time as a nurse, raised 2 kids, volunteered at a church, lived a normal, productive life. Her medication regimen worked. She was stable. She had no side effects, no signs of misuse, no problems at all. And her doctor retired. A new doctor looked at her chart and said, "This dose is too high. We need to taper you down." She explained that she'd been on this dose for over a decade. She was doing well. But, changing it would likely cause problems. The doctor said, "Guidelines say this is too much. We're going to cut it in half over the next 3 months." 3 months to cut her dose in half? It's a dose she'd been on and been stable with for over 12 years. She tried to comply, tried to adapt, but the pain became unmanageable. She had to quit her job. Could barely take care of her kids. Spent most days in bed crying, trying to survive. She begged her doctor to reconsider. What happened? He refused. This is the new standard of care. You see, Linda said, "I used to have a life. Now I just have pain. And nobody cares because they think I'm just an addict who can't handle a dose reduction." She's not an addict. She's a casualty of overcorrection. Some patients weren't even given the courtesy of a taper. When doctors got scared, when practices got shut down, when pharmacies stopped filling prescriptions, patients were just cut off. One day they had their medication, the next day, nothing. Do you really know what happens when you stop pain medication abruptly after years of use? It's not that the pain comes back. It comes back worse because your nervous system has been managing with the medication, and suddenly now it's gone. On top of that, you go into physical withdrawal. Even when you're not addicted, your body is adapted to the medication. So stopping suddenly causes severe pain amplification, nausea, vomiting, sweating, chills, muscle spasms, insomnia, anxiety, rapid heartbeat, dangerously high blood pressure. People have died from sudden withdrawal, not from overdoses, from being cut off. And even for those who survive the physical withdrawal, the psychological damage is profound. Imagine trusting the medical system, doing everything right, following the rules, and then being abandoned without warning, without support, without care. That's trauma in and of itself. Medical abandonment. That's a betrayal that destroys people's ability to trust the healthcare system ever again. When patients complained about being cut off or tapered, they were offered alternatives: physical therapy, acupuncture, mindfulness, yoga, cognitive behavioral therapy. And look, I'm not saying those things don't have value. For some people, in some situations, they can help. But for many chronic pain patients, especially those with severe neurological or structural pain, those alternatives they're like offering a Band-Aid for a severed limb. I've got nerve damage, permanent nerve damage from a botched nerve block. You know what physical therapy does for nerve damage? It makes it worse. You know what yoga does? It aggravates it. You know what mindfulness does? Makes me acutely aware of how much pain I'm in with no way to manage it. But when I told my doctor these alternatives weren't working, response was, "You're not trying hard enough. You need to commit to the process." No, I committed to the process. The process just failed me. It's not the other way around. This gaslighting, this instance that non-medication treatments should work for everyone, and if they don't, it's the patient's fault. Psychological abuse. As more doctors stopped treating chronic pain, the ones who continued became overwhelmed. Wait times to see pain specialists went from weeks to months to over a year in some areas. And many of those specialists stopped accepting new patients altogether. They just couldn't handle the volume. They couldn't handle the risk. So patients are stuck. Their primary care doctors won't treat them. Specialists won't see them. And they're left in limbo, suffering, with no path forward. I know someone who waited 14 months to get an appointment with a pain specialist. 14 months of increasing pain. 14 months of losing function. 14 months of their life falling apart. And when they finally got the appointment, the specialist spent 15 minutes with them, prescribed physical therapy, which they'd already tried and failed, and said, follow up in 6 more months of waiting for nothing. Here's the part that makes me furious, and it goes with my last episode. The part that should make everyone furious. Chronic pain patients die by suicide at twice the rate of the general population. Some studies say up to 4 times the rate. And since the opioid crisis response began, since patients started being denied care, that rate has only increased. People are killing themselves because they can't live with unmanaged pain, because the medical system has abandoned them, because there's no help, no hope. And those deaths, guess what? They're not being counted as part of the opioid crisis. They're not being tracked. They're not being acknowledged. And they're certainly not making headlines. A chronic pain patient who takes their own life because they can't access adequate pain management is just as much of a casualty of the opioid crisis as someone who overdoses. But guess what? We don't count them. We don't warn them. We don't even acknowledge them, because admitting they exist would complicate the narrative. It would force us to confront the harm we're causing with our overreaction. So we just don't talk about it. See, beyond the death, there's the living death that chronic pain patients experience when their care is taken away. Loss of employment, loss of income, loss of insurance, loss of housing, loss of the ability to parent, to be a partner, to have relationships. You lose your loss of independence and dignity and your loss of identity. I know a man who was a successful engineer, great career, made good money, supported his family, developed CRPS after a workplace injury. Severe, burning, relentless pain. Found a treatment plan that worked. It included medication. He was able to continue working, continue providing for his family. continuing to live his life. And then his workers' comp insurance decided he'd had enough time to heal and cut off his medication coverage. His employer's health coverage wouldn't cover it because it was a workplace injury. He couldn't afford to pay out of pocket. Medication was about $800 a month without insurance. Guess what happened? He lost his ability to work, lost his income, lost his health insurance completely, his house. His wife had to become the sole breadwinner while also being his caretaker. His kids stopped having a father who could play with them, help them with homework, or even have a conversation without being consumed by pain. Tell me the injury didn't destroy my life. The system did. Let's talk about the living myths that are driving this crisis of neglect. The assumptions that are killing chronic pain patients. Myth 1, everyone in pain can manage without medication. No, just no. Pain is not one thing. It's not a uniform experience that responds to uniform treatments. A headache is pain. A broken nose is pain. Nerve damage is pain. Cancer is pain. CRPS is pain. These are vastly different conditions requiring vastly different treatments. Some pain responds to physical therapy. Some pain responds to meditation. Some pain requires medication. And some pain, especially neurological pain, nerve pain, and severe chronic pain, only responds to medication. Pretending otherwise is medical gaslighting. Myth 2 is needing pain medication means you're weak. This myth is particularly cruel because it weaponizes strength against suffering people. You just need to toughen up. You just need more willpower. You just need to push through it. No, pain is not a character test. It's a medical condition. You don't tell a diabetic they're weak for needing insulin. You don't tell someone with a bacterial infection they're weak for needing antibiotics. But somehow, chronic pain patients are expected to white knuckle through unbearable suffering to prove we're strong enough. That's not strength. That's cruelty disguised as virtue. Your third myth is pain medication always leads to addiction. The conflation of dependence and addiction has done immeasurable harm. Dependence is a physical adaptation. When you take medication long term, your body adjusts. That's normal. That's expected. That happens with many medications, not just pain medication. Addiction is a psychological compulsion. It's characterized by using despite harm, inability to control use, and continue use despite negative consequences. These are different things. Most chronic pain patients who use medication appropriately do not become addicted. They become dependent, which is manageable and expected. But we've conflated the two, and now patients are being denied appropriate care because of this confusion. Your fourth myth is doctors who prescribe pain medication are bad doctors. This myth has destroyed pain care in this country. Good doctors who provide appropriate, compassionate care to complex patients were demonized, prosecuted, had their licenses revoked. Not because they were running pill mills, not because they were harming patients, but because they were helping patients in ways that made regulators comfortable. See, we've created an environment where doctors are punished for compassion and rewarded for denial. And the result? Good doctors stopped treating pain and patients suffered. Myth 5 is the opioid crisis was caused by pain patients. And let me be extremely clear about this. Chronic pain patients did not cause the opioid crisis. Pharmaceutical companies caused it by lying about addiction rates and pushing aggressive marketing. Some individuals caused it by misusing medication or selling their prescriptions. But the average chronic pain patient who takes medication as prescribed, who sees their doctor regularly, who manages their condition responsibly, they didn't cause this crisis, and they shouldn't be the ones that are punished for it. Myth 6 is pain is not that serious. This is the most pervasive and dangerous myth of all, because pain is invisible. People assume it's not real or not that bad, exaggerated. But chronic pain is one of the most debilitating conditions a human can experience. It affects every aspect of life. It causes disability. It causes mental health crises. It causes suicide. Pain is serious. It deserves serious medical attention. It deserves appropriate treatment. And dismissing it as not that serious is how we've ended up with a national crisis of untreated suffering. And here's what policymakers, lawmakers, and healthcare administrators don't understand about chronic pain. It has nothing to do about getting high. The fight for pain relief is not about chasing a high. It's about chasing a normal day, a functional morning, a few hours without burning, stabbing, crushing, tearing sensations ripping through our bodies. It's about being able to shower, drive, work, parent, sleep. Basic human activities that healthy people take for granted. And when medication works, we don't feel high. We feel normal. We feel like ourselves. We can think clearly. We can engage with our families. We can participate in life. That's what we're fighting for, not euphoria, functionality. Chronic pain and addiction are separate issues. Both deserve care. Both deserve compassion. Both deserve appropriate treatment. But they're not the same thing. And the system's inability to distinguish between them is harming both populations. Addiction treatment should be readily available, destigmatized, and effective. I support it. But chronic pain treatment should also be readily available, destigmatized, and effective. We don't have to choose. We can address both. But instead, we've decided to solve addiction by abandoning pain patients. And that's not a solution. That's just creating a different crisis. One-size-fits-all policies don't work for complex conditions. CDC guidelines, the dose limits, the duration limits, the mandatory tapers. All of these policies treat chronic pain like it's one uniform condition with one uniform solution. But it's not. Some patients need short-term pain management. Some need long-term. Some need low doses. Some need higher doses because their pain is more severe and because they metabolize medication differently. And some patients do well with non-medication treatments. Some don't. You see, medicine is supposed to be individualized, patient-centered, based on each person's unique needs and circumstances. But we've thrown that out in favor of blanket policies that harm more people than they help. The unintended consequences are worse than the original problem. Here's what the overcorrection has caused. You've got patients driven to suicide, patients turning to street drugs, which are actually more dangerous, patients losing their ability to function and become disabled, patients developing severe mental health crises from untreated pain. There's a massive increase in suffering with no corresponding decrease in addiction. Yet we haven't solved the opioid crisis. We've just shifted who's dying. Before, people were dying from overdoses. Now people are dying from untreated pain and suicide. And somehow we're calling that progress? That's complete BS. Doctors need protection to do their jobs. Right now, doctors are operating from fear. Fear of the DEA, fear of lawsuits, fear of losing their licenses. When doctors operate from fear, the only ones that suffer are patients. We need legal protections for doctors who practice appropriately, who document their care, who assess their patients properly, who make individualized treatment decisions based on medical judgment. Good doctors should not be punished for helping complex patients. Bad actors should absolutely be held accountable, but we need to distinguish between the two. And right now, we're not doing that. The real crisis isn't opioids. The real crisis is what we've decided an entire population of sick people is acceptable collateral damage. We've decided these deaths don't count. Overdose deaths are counted. They're tracked. They're reported, used to justify policy. But suicide deaths from untreated pain, it's not counted. It's not tracked. It's not even acknowledged. No one really cares. People who turn to street drugs because they can't get legal prescriptions and die from fentanyl contamination, guess what? They're counted as overdoses. not as failures of the medical system. People who become disabled because they lost access to care, they're not counted. People whose lives have been destroyed, not counted. We only count the deaths that support the narrative. Everything else, it's invisible. We've decided suffering doesn't matter. As long as people aren't dying from overdoses, we consider the problem solved. You just wash their hands of it. Never mind that millions of people are suffering unbearably. Never mind that they've lost their quality of life, their independence, their dignity. As long as they're not dying the wrong way, we don't care. And that's the message chronic pain patients receive every day. Your suffering doesn't matter. Your quality of life doesn't matter. It's all about the numbers. We've decided stigma is more important than care. The stigma around pain medication has become so extreme that it overrides medical judgment. Doctors would rather let patients suffer than risk being associated with opioid prescribing. Pharmacies would rather refuse legitimate prescription than risk being seen as enabling addiction. Insurance companies would rather deny coverage than risk criticism. You see, everyone is more concerned with how they look than with whether their patients are being helped. And patients are the only ones paying the price for everyone else's fear of judgment. We've decided policy matters more than people. Guidelines matter more than individual patient needs. Dose limits matter more than functional outcomes. Statistics matter more than suffering, and policy matters more than people. And until that changes, chronic pain patients will continue to be sacrificed at the altar of political optics. So you see, this is not a small issue. This is a national crisis of neglect. And here's what needs to change. We've got to acknowledge the harm being done. We need to admit that the overcorrection has caused massive harm to innocent people. We need to count the suicides, track the suffering, acknowledge the human cost of these policies. And until we admit there's a problem, we can't fix it. We've got to restore nuance to the conversation. We need to stop treating opioids as uniformly evil and start treating them as tools that can be used appropriately or inappropriately. We need to distinguish between addiction and dependence, between misuse and medical use, between pill mills and legitimate pain management. Nuance is uncomfortable, but it's necessary. We've got to start individualizing care instead of standardizing it. Patients need individualization. They need individualized treatment plans based on their unique conditions, needs, and circumstances. Not one-size-fits-all policies, not arbitrary limits, not blanket restrictions. Medicine is supposed to be patient-centered. So let's actually do that. Protect the doctors who practice responsibly. Our good doctors need legal protection to treat complex patients without fear of prosecution. We need clear guidelines that distinguish between appropriate prescribing and pill mills. We need to stop punishing doctors for showing compassion. We've got to make pain treatment accessible again. Patients shouldn't have to wait a year to see a specialist. Shouldn't have to drive hours to find a pharmacy that will fill their prescription. They shouldn't have to fight their insurance for months to get coverage. Pain treatment should be accessible, affordable, and available. And we've got to listen to chronic pain patients. We're the ones living this. We're the experts on our own experience. Listen to us. Believe us. Include us in policy decisions that affect our care. And stop making decisions about us without us. If you're living in this nightmare right now, if you've been abandoned by the medical system, if you're being treated like a criminal for needing help, if you're suffering and no one will listen, I want you to know something. This is not your fault. You're not weak. You're not an addict. You're not the problem. The system is broken and you deserve better. In my coaching program, I work with chronic pain patients who are navigating this impossible landscape. We work on advocating for yourself effectively when doctors are dismissive. Finding providers who will actually help. Because yes, they still exist. documenting your condition in ways that protect you from stigma, building resilience while fighting for appropriate care, to managing the trauma of medical abandonment, and creating a quality of life even when treatment is limited. See, I can't prescribe medication, but I can help you fight for the care you deserve. I can help you survive emotionally while you're in this battle. You don't have to do this alone. Head to my painfullyrealshop and book a free discovery call. Let's talk about what you're facing and how I can support you. Because at the end of the day, you deserve care. You deserve relief. You deserve to be treated like a human being. So let me help you fight for that. Chronic pain patients deserve to be seen, heard, respected, treated with humanity. We deserve medical professionals who can tell the difference between addiction and disease. And we deserve lawmakers who understand the science. We deserve access to treatments that work for us, not the ones that make politicians uncomfortable. This community has been silent long enough. It's time to talk about the damage the opioid crisis response has done to people who were never the problem. It's time to stop treating chronic pain patients like suspects. It's time to rebuild trust, compassion, and real care. This is not a small issue. This is a national crisis of neglect. And chronic pain patients deserve better. Share this episode. Start conversations. Make people uncomfortable because people are suffering right now while everyone looks at the other way. But we can't let that happen. We can't let it continue. Thank you for listening. If this episode resonated with you, if you've lived this nightmare, if you know someone who has, share it. Hit the subscribe button. The only way this changes is if people understand what's really happening. Because at the end of the day, you matter. Your life matters. Hold on, and I'll see you next time.